Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Today we are going through chapters 31 through 40. As always, we have Jonathan with us. We've got Joe with us, and our special guest for these recaps. We have Sean from Kingdom in Context. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, guys. Good to see
Fantastic.
you again. Thanks for having me on.
Good to see you, brother.
Absolutely, good to
Yeah,
see you, man.
likewise.
Any updates from last time we were together on the tea company or anything?
Yeah, we've been selling tea, so people seem to be liking it. They're reordering and seem to have good reviews so far. If you are a hot tea drinker, with these two special blends we released, the Sabbath Rest and also our Tree of Life blend. So I think they're delicious, and I personally created the blends myself. So we've been having a good time with that. It's been great, and we're still working on this contextual study guide. We're still we're still about to release the Wisdom Guard, the actual scripture trivia video game.
Very cool.
And so, and we're still working on Days of Noah. So we got a lot of projects under works, and we're still doing all the artwork for episode 2 for that. And so, yeah, we got a lot of things in motion. So
Awesome.
we're excited, trying to bring some resources to the body.
Hey man,
There you go.
you are a busy man, so we appreciate your time you dedicate to doing this with us. So, well, with that, you know what? Let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going 31 through 40. Sean, start us off, man. What's something you want to dive into right off the bat?
Oh, okay. Well, chapter 31. I mean, to me, this is a wonderful concept here, parallel in Genesis 35, because you got Jacob and his whole family getting up and getting themselves prepared to go down to Bethel. So this, to me, that seems to be where the tabernacle was, and this is where they're going to observe on this new moon. So it seems to be a Day of Trumpets that this is taking place.
Right.
It's the third new moon observance, the first of the 7th month, and then it's my thing that I've always thought about, which I thought was interesting. This is in both accounts, Genesis and Jubilees. You have Jacob telling all the people, and we talked about this, I think, in the previous review, 21 through 30, about how many people were actually with these families, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because we know Abraham had his own elite army. That's men. That went 318 men. That means they had wives and most likely children. So it could have been a couple thousand people with him.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that he brings later. We're going to see him bring a tithe, which is a pretty substantial, pretty decent sized tithe. So if you extrapolated 90% on top of what he gives, that's he's doing well as a shepherd, if you will. If that's his only means of income, I don't think it really tells us his different ways he made income, but it seems like a substantial tithe that he brings. And so he has this household of people that he tells them to put away your idols. So same thing in Genesis 35. It seems as if they held on to these adornments like earrings and nose rings and these relics that were fashioned after false gods. And these are people in his quote unquote household. And that's always been something that popped up to me as like, wait a minute, what is going on here? Because I would imagine that these people are all circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
So why do they have these things? As well as what you're highlighting on screen here, Rachel stealing her father Laban's idols. She still has them with her at this moment. How many years has this been since she departed from her father's house and stole them? And so it just makes me wonder, like, was this a moment where Jacob was calling to repentance everyone in his household?
Yeah.
I kind of think so.
Because he's the one that initiates. Arise, get up, and let's put away all these things. We're going down to worship Yahweh. So, and then of course he breaks into pieces and burns the idols of Laban, and then buries them under this tree, which is a Torah precedent that we see in the book of Joshua. So it seems to be that this is a moment of he gave them time to repent on their own, and now as patriarchal leader of this whole group of people, he's like, now you're going to do what I say. Everyone get up, put away your idols. Rachel, no holding back. Can't sit on the camel this time. I'm, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know you got them. Give them up. We're destroying them. Like, you can't hang on to these. And it's like he's cleaning house, so to speak, literally, metaphorically.
So Go ahead, John.
Okay, yeah. So speaking of cleaning house, this was very reminiscent to Abraham. Exact same story where he goes in and he takes the idols and burns down the house of all the idols. And so, when you look at those parallels, you're like, oh, okay, a lot of time has passed. You have Isaac and Ishmael, and different events. Okay, Abraham was a one-off. You're like, nope, Jacob's following suit and doing exactly what Abraham did. He's like, take the idols, burn them up. It's time, you got to get him out of here. So I thought that was really intriguing that you shared that bit, because it's so similar in like what they were doing is, before we go forward, we have to get rid of the bad. The process of repentance is turning away. And he says we got to turn away from all the old stuff, even though if they had a good intention behind it. Hey, let's take these so Laban doesn't use them. Yeah, but we still have to get rid of them. Like, we don't get to, now it can't be our burden and our problem. We have to be cleansed from all of that. So it's very interesting to see those two stories parallel there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we do have the yearly command, obviously, to get the leaven out for unleavened bread. But this is around the time of Sukkot. This is the 7th month. And so we're going to see later that they do celebrate Sukkot, and that's where he offers his tithe. And so it's interesting to me that they're going to present themselves to Yahweh. Again, the law of God is eternal. And here he is calling his household and the people that are going to go with him to make sure their hearts are circumcised. In addition to not letting their bodies be unclean when they show up.
Right.
They don't have these tainted idols that are literally on their bodies showing up to Bethel,
Yep.
Like, I don't know what gods it could have possibly been, but it's weird to me because it's like this sense of, we don't know the dynamics of the household. Like, if he had a couple thousand people under his belt, so to speak, what's the arrangement? Are they living all in tents? Is it a mobile situation here, or do they have more of a small village they've set up and they're more stable with longer standing structures? But still, there's all these logistics that start happening when you have that many people, and some of those logistics is the basics of trade, travel. Like, obviously 2,000 men ish, if like, this is a couple generations down from Abraham and Isaac, so it seems, I don't know how many men he had. I don't know how many people this was, right? In addition to his own family. But like, we already see in the previous chapters when Dinah was taken, he just let 12-year-old Dinah go off to find her brothers in the field. So it's not like he's keeping a strict eye on everybody, is what I'm getting at. I would have never let like, if I lived in the ancient Canaan, I'm sorry, I'm not judging Jacob, but I would have never let my 12-year-old daughter go wander off in the field alone to go find my older brothers.
Right.
In the ancient world, right? Knowing people get kidnapped and trafficked all the time. Even in today, in the United States of America, I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, you can go walk across town by yourself,
right?
Just to find someone you don't know who's there, right? So it seems to me as if there's a lot of freedom in whoever, all these people that are around Jacob, and how they can come and go, and they don't live in some sort of walled off city. And so as a result of that, they could be out going to visit the neighboring cities, or like, we see later with Judah, he goes to get the sheep sheared and he goes and hangs out with a harlot, and you're like, did you go alone? Did your boy go with you?
Right.
Did your boy not say anything? Or your friend or some of the servants, or like, how many people witnessed this? Like, what's going on? Did you have to tell him to shush? Did you just slip away quietly at night? Like, how did this what are the logistics here for Judah to be able to do this? And how did Tamar leave the household and know where she was either?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Is she a small girl? She's like 4'11", got in the saddlebag of a donkey, and he took her up there and didn't even know? Like, there's all these logistics of like, what is going on here? This seems to have this freedom of travel, and that's going to get you mingling with people that worship different gods.
Yeah.
So are
Everybody's
these people
feral.
Yeah, are these people truly worshiping different gods, or did they bought some adornments as they went to different neighboring cities? And Jacob was like, yeah, I don't really like that. It looks a lot like Baal in your nose right there. I don't really like that adornment, but so it's interesting to see, like, because it's hard for me to believe that Jacob is just allowing full-on idolatry within his house.
That's kind of where I was going to go with my question that I had is, what do y'all think about this? Because I was under the impression when Rachel stole the idols that she was taking them from her father so her father didn't have the idols, not so that she could have one to worship herself. Right. That's what I was originally thinking. But the fact that she still has it at this point makes you go,
Yeah, why do you still have it?
Why? Yeah, why?
Like, why haven't you just thrown it in the river somewhere else? Like, you think your father's going to be drawn to it like the ring from Mordor? Like,
Yeah.
is he just going to be drawn to it and go pick up this idol and somehow, cause you harm later? Like, no, you've already confronted. Jacob's already confronted Laban. They settled. They made their pact. They're living their own life now. Throw that stuff away, man. Don't hang on to that stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought interesting too. I highlighted it a little bit. The part about the strange, and they gave it the strange gods, which is an interesting phrase in the first place. Strange gods. Maybe another time for that one. I don't know, but which was in their ears and on their necks. So yeah, I was kind of curious about that too. If this was an open thing that they were doing, are they just blatantly just expressing the gods that they worship, or is this one of those things like what you said, where it's just kind of part of available jewelry, and oh, this is neat, and they got it, and they picked up on it, and it's like, that looks a little too much like old boy over here. We don't want to do that. So
there's an old movie that it just cracks me up, man. I saw this when I was like 20 years old. It just made me laugh so hard for some reason. And it's this Dudley Moore movie. I think it was called Holy Moses, something like that. It's from like the 70s. And Dudley Moore it's supposed to be about biblical times, and he's an idol maker who's like can't find work. He's like traveling from city to city trying to make little widgets and idols for people, for their gods. And anyway, it's a stupid parody movie, but it's almost like a History of the World parody, right? It's dumb, but it just made me think though, like, what if there would be traveling idol makers that come around selling you jewelry, but they fashioned it after false gods, or just at the marketplace in whatever city you went to go shear the sheep, or just to go sell the cattle on a regular basis, or whatever you did, wherever they went to market. So are they actually worshiping? It's hard to say. The text doesn't say they were actually in idolatrous sin inside of his house. But yes, I would agree with Jacob. You're not going to show up to the house of Yahweh with Baal in your nose ring, or Molech in your ear, little owl in your ear. You know what I mean?
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I kind of equated to like the time of them leaving Egypt with the mixed multitude. They had some cleaning up to do. They're like, hey, it's a bunch of random people showed up. I'm glad you're here. And, you took the first step of faith. That's all that really matters in this scenario. But then now there's tomorrow, right? Like when we go to our average church, it's yes, you heard the message, you are interested in the gospel, you've made a decision to walk for God. Okay, but then there's tomorrow. Now you got to walk out your path of salvation. You have to start doing discipleship. Yeah, that's shedding off some of your old ways, your old things, and your old lifestyle. So it's probably more of that, of just, hey, okay, yeah, we were in a strange land doing strange stuff with strange gods, and that was norm there, but that's not what's going to carry us into the future. We're not going to carry that with us.
Yeah, in fact, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was thinking about this just the other day. Have you guys read that in I think it's in Joshua chapter 5, verse 5. Let me go and make sure here. If you read the Septuagint in Joshua 5, it says, no, it's in verse 6. Let me start in verse 5 real quick. It says, all these Joshua circumcised for 40 and 2 years. Israel wandered in the wilderness of Madbaris, which is a very similar sounding name to the city that Jacob goes to settle in later. But I was trying to figure out what that city was, by the way, because I know it's translated from the Greek. It's Greek transliteration like the Septuagint. So, but verse 6, it says, wherefore most of the fighting men that came out of the land of Egypt were uncircumcised, who disobeyed the commands of God, concerning whom they also had been determined they shall not see the land. So the Masoretic gives you the impression that everybody got circumcised in Exodus 12. But the Septuagint says that whereas most of the fighting men that came out of the land of Egypt were uncircumcised. So, and it seems as if a lot of them were part of those judgments that happen periodically that we see taking place throughout those 40 years. So they physically and the heart both were uncircumcised. So this is some of the commentary in the Septuagint happening at the moment where Joshua is circumcising everybody before they go into Jericho. So I agree with you. Even 40 years later, there's some cleaning up that still had to be done. But these people are still rolling with all of Egypt. They're still observing the Passover. They're still observing, Shavuot. They're still, going through all the motions, but yet I don't like. It just makes you wonder, how did these people get away with being uncircumcised that whole time? Or did most of these men die in like Korah's rebellion and some of the other plagues that broke out and different things like that? Are those the people that actually died when these plagues broke out? Just makes you wonder. But the point is, it's not cut and dry. It was sticky. It was the details were sticky as far as all these massive amounts of people, and not all of them were completely sold out for Yahweh.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting to point out kind of something that's not being said in this.
Okay.
Is or not, I guess maybe not plainly stated anyway, and that is the fact that, you know, these people have gold. We have no, not that I'm familiar with any mention of any of these people mining for gold or, you know, searching for it, digging it up, whatever. So they're having interaction, and they're being able, not just, maybe they're just trading their, you know, their wool and things like that. I don't know, but they're interacting with the other nations, right? They're in the world, but not supposed to be of the world, right? And even when they come into the land, and you know, all the tribes are together, there's still people that come to the city, right? There's people that come to them, and they go outside of the gates. They go outside of the city. So there's still interaction with the other nations, and I guess that's what makes it so hard. But it's just, there's a lot of people in this walk nowadays that really thinks it's the right idea to just kind of become this off-grid hobbit and be to yourself and not have any interaction whatsoever with the world. And while that sounds awesome and peaceful and that sort of stuff, it's just, I don't know how you could do that and still
Be a light to the nations.
be a light to the nations. Exactly.
Yeah, it makes it tough.
To me, that's reminds me of the parable of Christ. You know, putting your bowl over that lamp, because you've put yourself in a place where your lamp can't shine very far or very bright. There's no one to shine on. You know,
And you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
So I know in here we get introduced to Levi becoming the priest, or getting the blessing of the priesthood, and Judah being the leader or the king character. I know Pastor Joe had something on that one. Whenever, you know, we see Levi so early on getting the priesthood and the blessing coming from from Isaac, excuse me. I just thought those were interesting points to bring up in there.
Do you have a specific verse you wanted to reference?
It's a whole bunch of them. Verse 16, thy mother hath called thy name Levi, and justly hath she called thy name. Thou wilt be joined to Yahuwah, and the companion of his sons Jacob. So there's a big portion there, because they're each one of their blessings for Levi, and then the whole blessing there for Judah. And you know, of course, we know it's interesting that those were the two kids that they decided to bring with him. He could have brought anybody. He brought Levi and Judah. There was, you know, a specific reason for that. And like I said, I know Pastor Joe hit on that one a whole bunch.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Did you guys talk about verse 8, where before Isaac prophesies over him, he's given his sight back?
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's interesting. It's like, it's almost as if God doesn't want a blind man to prophesy.
Well, I was going to bring that up. That was going to be the 2 points. Jonathan brought the one up. I thought how important this chapter is, and just how important these blessings are, because this affects everything going forth. Everything. The 2 blessings that are given. But I was going to give one little funny in here. I thought it was funny in verse 10. So Jacob's having this conversation with his father. Says that his eyes are lifted. He can see. And actually, let's go to verse 9. There we go. And it says, and the darkness left the eyes of Isaac, and he saw the 2 sons of Jacob, Levi and Judah. And he said, are these thy sons, my son? For they are like thee. And he said unto him that they were truly his sons, and thou hast truly seen that they are truly my sons. And it says, and they came near to him. So I thought it was funny, because after the whole blessing debacle that took place,
Right,
you can understand Isaac being a little bit skeptical here. He's like, wait a minute, now these are, because you said, you didn't lie, you did say I am your son, Father. But, are these really your boys? So I thought it was kind of a little bit of a funny moment there where he's like, no, Dad, seriously, truly, these are mine. Truly, you have seen them. So I thought it was a little bit funny. It's like Isaac's kind of coming to his own again. He's like, whoa, wait a minute, time out. But
yeah, it's pretty wild.
Again, I think the blessing that takes place here is just that's so important and timely. This blessing that takes place again, it goes forth through the Levitical priesthood, through Judah, all the way through our King Messiah. So all this going forth is it's incredible. I love it.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about it is you go all the way to the end of this chapter. It says, and they recorded it as an eternal testimony unto them on the heavenly tables, how Isaac blessed them. So this wasn't a one-off, they were just sentimental. Well, these are just the two random kids that showed up, just throw them a blessing, whatever. This is the 99-cent sucker by the register. This was intentional, on purpose, written down, recorded, and this wasn't they didn't have to wait till Mount Sinai to find out this information. They didn't start, accepting these roles once something bad happened. It was, this is what it's supposed to be. And we have recorded scripture in our canon that gives us the exact same information. So it's just laid out for us pretty plain and clear here.
Yeah, I like the Levi's prophecy in verse 14 is an actual acknowledgement of Yahweh's angels serving in his sanctuary, which is what the Levites are going to be mimicking. So I think that's pretty cool. It's just another reminder of, hey, you're doing what they're doing in heaven. So it's like a great privilege to go through these motions and take this seriously,
Yeah, and I don't want to go too far into this, as we will have to make multiple recordings if we do. But I'm glad you brought that up, Sean, because this is where I feel like the church, the body, the main church part of this walk is missing so much information. A lot of it goes to Jesus died on the cross, died for your sins, and that's it. We don't get anything else. We don't really get a lot of discussions into the book of Hebrews. We don't discuss the fact that he's actually in the role of a priest right now. These are things that you never, and I got saved at the age of 14, been in church since the age of about 18, and I don't remember there being any impactful teachings on Hebrews, and that our Messiah is actually doing the work up there in the heavenlies. And that the fact that we were I think a lot of people, I think the reason why people disconnect from the Torah and go, oh, all that was done away with, is they don't realize this was already happening before the Torah was physically given at Mount Sinai.
Right.
They don't realize that this was already being written on the heavenly tablets a long time ago, before you were ever even thought of. And the fact that we're supposed to mirror what is taking place in the heavens, that meant when Christ died, I guess everybody lost their jobs, everybody's on welfare in heaven, and just it's all shut down, and this, for nothing. But it's amazing because, and then you got the people who want to shoot this book down and just totally discredit it. But it's through these teachings that we realize that these were written on the heavenly tablets or the tables or whatever you want to call it. We realize that these have been recorded since the beginning of time, or before time, that we know of. And so when you start discrediting all this, and you start they keep removing, or they've been trying to remove the information, how much more of a complete story do we have of what's supposed to be taking place here? It's the same thing that's been taking place in the heavenlies and will continue to take place when Messiah comes back. And it's like the whole church has been lulled to sleep a long time ago, 2,000 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Just put into bed and just go, here you go. Don't worry about nothing. Here's a little pacifier for you. And, then let the misinformation begin on everything. So,
yeah, I think fundamentally that problem of what you're explaining there, Joe, is that the majority of Christians, even pastors, have been already lulled to sleep to think that heaven's not a real place. It's not a tangible, corporeal existence. So how in the world could the Messiah truly be ministering in a sanctuary? I mean, don't you know that Paul called you a temple? So that must mean in Hebrews 8, when it says Jesus is ministering in a sanctuary, that just means that Jesus is in your heart, And so let's not focus on that. Just come up front and ask Jesus into your heart. So like that's how they just divert away from all of it, right? It's just there's no true teaching to the people to understand the Bible that's in their hands, and that's sad. And then of course that bad teaching does carry over into Torah observant people as well. Right. There's one Torah observant teacher that I saw who disagrees with Jubilees. He also doesn't think that sacrifices are coming back when Christ returns. So one night he was talking about that on a video, and he was literally reading a passage from the Old Testament where it talks about sacrifices being done in the house of God from Ezekiel. And he paused and he goes, "Huh, that's a curious passage. I'll have to look into that some more."
Yep.
Yeah, I'm like, you think? So I'm like, anytime you need to talk to me, bro, I'm
Don't you
here.
hate when the Bible gets in the way of logic?
Right.
Yeah.
I
So that's the sad reality is so many people don't believe so many concrete things in the Bible. They've just been told it's not real. You can't believe that. You should make metaphor somehow.
yeah. Well, high priest is a term that's used quite a bit in the New Testament, but there's not a lot of definition of what that looks like in the New Testament. There's not a lot of information sharing what this role that the high priest is going to be carrying out that you get in this book here. So, I can't remember a time where I have ever heard until I started following Torah. I can't think of a single time that I ever heard a preacher even mention him as being a high priest, other than maybe if they just read through a passage that had that in there. He's only ever referred to as king. And I think there's just so much. I'm with you, Joe, on that. Like, there's just so much that people are missing out on.
Well, and a quick reason why I think that is when you look at the priesthood in the New Testament, it's all wrong and corrupted. It was bought and paid for. It was, gone through sedition, bloodshed. They weren't following the ways of the scriptures anyway. So why preach about it? Why talk about it? If you're a New Testament only believer and that's your example, then yeah, toss that. And Yeshua literally says, yeah, no, none of this. Actually, the building's gonna be gone too. So let's just get rid of the whole thing altogether. So we know there's no more mistaking what's right and what's wrong. I'll just get rid of all of it, and now you'll know that I'm the one true Messiah, and everything else is a liar. So I think that's the unfortunate side of it is, our New Testament doesn't give us a lot of good example of what high priest is because it wasn't a good example. And that's why we have to actually understand what it is and why he had to become the better covenant, not a new or different one, just a better one. He's like, hey, I've improved the process. Now I am perfect. So therefore I can be a perfect high priest and I don't have to sacrifice for myself at all. And I can't mess up. I always do it right every single time.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if any of the priests that he spoke around, if they had understood the law and the prophets well enough to realize the Messiah was prophesied to become a high priest of God. And if they felt threatened by that, So when he's like,
sure.
by the way, I'm here. Like, but what about us? And it just depends on how their level of understanding, if they, because there's other prophecies about Levi, the Levites holding the priesthood forever, being restored in the earth, all that stuff. So it just makes you wonder, at what point did they stop taking seriously the prophets beyond Moses? Because clearly they idolized Moses, but then, even still carries over traditional modern Judaism. They idolize Moses, but then all the other prophets are like, take it or leave it, or, well, we could disagree on it. I don't know. It says what it says. I get it. But, people disagree on it. I don't know what it means, and they're like, instead of just as a teacher proclaiming the Tanakh, coming to a definitive stance on what these important men of God spoke, So it's interesting. I've always wondered if that same sentiment held in those ancient days as well with Christ, where they, maybe they didn't understand that Melchizedek could not be a priest on the earth because the Levites already held that position, that he could only be priest in the Father's heavenly tabernacle, But then you're talking to the Sadducees, who mostly held the priestly class, and you're like, okay, but it says they don't believe in angels,
right?
Or the resurrection.
Or the resurrection. So what's going on here? How did they get so far off track? Because like the angels are a priesthood, right? So you don't even believe they exist, much less try to understand why they're called ministering spirits in the Old Testament. Just a lot of confusion. I can't say it enough. Matthew chapter 4, he's quoting Isaiah chapter 9. Christ is a light that shines in Zebulun, a darkened land. Like Israel was full of corruption, full of bad doctrine. We look back and we think, they had a temple, they had priests, they had Pharisees running around telling people to keep the law. But these people did, yeah, I know, right? But these people did not actually know or believe the Bible. Like they were all playing church.
Yeah.
Right.
And it just parallels our society in my mind so strongly today that it's frightening. Because we need a John the Baptist, because John the Baptist was sent so that plague would not come on the land, so the hearts of the sons would be turned back to their fathers. Otherwise, they would receive judgment. And I'm sitting there going, may God please do that to us, because I don't want us to have to go through judgment.
Well, I mean, you just nailed it. I mean, why are they so confused? Because any prophets that came to tell them how to get everything corrected, they ended up killing them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think too with that, guys, you can see this in Nicodemus in that conversation that he had with Yeshua was you can see where Nicodemus was in his understanding, because even Christ says, you don't understand these, but you call yourself a teacher of the people.
Right.
So you can see that I believe, and this is where I believe, I've talked about this many times, is that Yeshua had a profound impact on his life. He shows up in the cover of night. He said, and not only him, but he says, me and my brothers, the other guys, we understand that you are sent from God, that no one can do what you do unless you were sent by him. So I think this is where Yeshua kind of takes him down this little road here and kind of sees where he's at and goes, wait a minute, if you're not going to believe the things here on earth, how are you going to believe the heavenly things? And then he says, you being a teacher of the people, you telling me you don't understand any of this?
Right.
So yes, you can kind of gauge from there kind of where I think the mainstream of their thoughts were.
Right. And Yeshua definitely didn't call them synagogue of friends. So, that's the one little detail there. But one of the verses that actually jumped off the page for me, because we're talking about Levi right now, is in chapter 32. It says that right at the beginning, Levi dreamed and that he had been ordained, that he was the priest of the Most High. And then in verse 9, it says Levi discharged the priestly office. So if there's any debate or any confusion of when, where, how, why, I mean, we're getting all the details just kind of clearly laid out for us. He was told it was going to happen. He had a dream that it was going to happen. So the confirmation. And then in verse 9, he did it. He actually did the job. It didn't say he got smited or anything because he did the job. He did exactly what he was supposed to do correctly. And Sean brought it up perfectly earlier. What are they doing? Feast of Tabernacles, Booths, Occult. They're taking care of the feast days, again, way before Sinai. So we're getting just priesthood, feast days, the priestly calendar, the schedule, all the things are all the elements are here for us to follow, to understand. It says that it was on the tablets eternally, forever, that it wasn't going to change, no deviation, no schedule change, it depends on what time of the day the light comes in, the moon and the sun and the stars. Just like, hey, this is the 14th day, that's what's happening. That's it. We just counted. We didn't do anything special. They didn't have to adjust the priestly tablets every year to figure it out. They just was like, oh, this is what we're doing in heaven. You copy what we're doing. Everybody wins because you guys have the privilege of getting to mirror what we're doing. It's not a command. It's a privilege. It's like, hey, you're the only chosen people that get to do this stuff. If you're not in covenant with me, then you're just the part of the nations and do what they do. But you get to do what we do.
Right.
Awesome.
Yes. There's a lot in chapter 32 as well, as far as just my first thought was, upon reading this again to study, and brush myself up for this discussion, was the idea of Levi receiving the priesthood, but it doesn't say he's the high priest. And so when we understand the priesthood, there's roles, there's positions, and he's at this time, he's like 18 years old. So it never made sense to me that he would be immediately the high priest. But it would make sense that if he is being taught the priesthood, that means you start, as a servant to the high priest, like the other priests. You know what I'm saying?
I like
so
that.
Because we already see that back in chapter 13 of Jubilees, that the Melchizedek had multiple priests. When Abraham offered the tithe, it says that he and his priests ate it. So that was a most high priest, or a high priest with lesser priests below him. So it would make perfect sense that throughout Levi's life, he may have grown into the high priest position as he matured and got older, but it's still an incredible honor to be a part of this priesthood.
So he had to start out in the mail room and work his way up.
You start. Yeah. So this is why I've always said this. This is the moment that Malachi 2 talks about, that the Levite becomes, the syndicacy of priesthood becomes a part of Levi. But that doesn't mean that Levi, because he's being given a priesthood that is a Melchizedek priesthood on the earth at this time. Like, this is the righteous rulers. He's being inducted and learning the ways of Yahweh into that priesthood. And so it just makes you wonder, like, okay, at what point, now at this point within Israel, all the furthering priests thereon have to be from Levi.
Mhm.
But as we know, there are other Melchizedeks running around outside of Levi. We see it in Genesis or Exodus 18 with Jethro.
Mm-hmm.
So if he's the high priest of Midian, he's a righteous ruler. That's a Melchizedek. He's a patriarch, and he's the highest point of authority. He's a righteous ruler. That's literally the definition of a Melchizedek. So that's outside of what the spotlight that we get on Levi inside Israel's family.
Mhm.
Let me ask you this: do you think at all Levi being the 10th, that's why he was given unto Yahweh, is sanctified unto Yahweh? Does that ever cross your mind at all? Or that
Well,
theory, I've seen that theory before, that because he was the 10th, that's why he was set apart and
he was a
Lord.
10th if you count down from Benjamin, right?
Yes.
Okay, so he's a 10th if you count in a specific way. So I'm fine. Look, I'm fine with the theory.
Yeah, I didn't know if you ever thought about that, or if that ever crossed your mind.
No, I think it's great. As far as theories go, it's great. But it's just clearly he had the right heart for it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's what we talked about last time, zeal against the Shechemites.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then we see, I know Abraham, he was the first one to celebrate Sukkot, which, again, we surprised Jubilees is giving us information, but Abraham's the first one to do it. And, what an honor. Could you imagine you're the first one who's ever done something? God entrusted you that much to get to do something no one else has ever done. And you're copying exactly what's happening in the heavenly realms. Like, that blows my mind to even think of, like, because you're going to look crazy. You know what I mean? You're like, hey, by the way, I'm going to, walk around the fire 7 times a day. And everybody's looking like, why? Hey, that's what's happening. When he told me to do it, that's what he told me to do. I don't know exactly why. And then so Jacob, 1 or 2 generations down the line, now he's starting the 8th day. And this is the first of that for his process, and now you see Jacob is a made man at this point. And at least in my opinion, he's getting that special one-off treatment. He already had the vision of the ladder ascending and descending. He's already had all the stuff going on with Laban and all the things that happened in his story. But now it's like, hey, the feast day, not gonna say it changed, but he was introduced to the 8th day. And it was something that he got to do for the first time. So, you're seeing this family isn't just Abraham got all the cool stuff and the sons just had to deal with what was left over. It's God's continually moving and working through each man's life along the way in new and different ways, so that each one has their own specific relationship with the Father. It's not just, oh, it's my daddy's God. Oh, it's my God too. Like, I serve him and he's working through me in a really cool way. So yeah, the 8th day coming in way before Sinai, Sukkot, way before Sinai, priesthood, all that stuff.
I really like what you said earlier about we get to do this, rather than it, commanded kind of thing. We get to do this as a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
We think about some of the older patriarchs. We've got Noah, we've got Enoch, we've got all these men that were seen as righteous that didn't do that, right? That wasn't participating in, like, let's say, Sukkot, right?
Yeah.
Can you think of a record?
The best that we know.
Can you think of a record of that, Sean? Like, Abraham's the first one to do that, right?
To celebrate Sukkot?
Yeah.
Besides the angels. If
correct.
If Jubilees is true. And I got a question about that when you're done.
So I'm kind of, I guess, correlating this a little bit to the to not only is it something that we get to do, but it's also something where, we, again, in this community, hopefully we can keep getting better and better about this, but there still is that tendency to just beat people over the head with scriptures. And it's like, no, let them walk out their salvation in fear and trembling. Be the example, share things with them, but don't come at people with this. If you're not doing this, then you're sinning or whatever. Really? Like, I can't stand to see that. I used to be one of those people, and I can't stand it. I can't stand it.
Yeah, I think we all come out of our Torah terrorism stage.
And Kyle,
Cage-
I'm so
cage
glad
stage.
it's been at least 3 or 4 days since you've come out of that. And
At least.
we all feel so much better.
Take some time.
Yeah.
No more behind the camera scolding.
Yeah, in fact, that's my question about Sukkot is if it's kept in heaven, just like all the other feasts of God, just like all the other law of God. Think about that for a minute. What's the command of Sukkot? Go to the house of the Lord, take your tent with you, stay there for 7 days. So let's apply that to heaven above. Now, what would that logically entail?
It sounds like they're going from one dome to another to me, you know.
Sounds like they're going to the house of the Lord from all the places and all the different levels they may live in with some sort of makeshift tent so they can stay for a week. Can you imagine the scene?
Whatever that looks like.
Outside of the tessellated, beautiful house of fire that Enoch describes in Enoch 70 as the Father's sanctuary. And then outside of it is just a sea of like white tents of all the angels sitting up there, just to see as far as you could see in all directions as they're encamped around the house of the Lord for Sukkot. Just wow. Like I just can only imagine. And it also has always made me think about Revelation chapter 20 because, when Satan's let out, it says he deceives people, then they come and attack the New Jerusalem, the beloved city. It says they come and he attacks the encampment of the saints around the beloved city. And I'm like, okay, this is at the end of the 1,000 years. So people have already had a chance to, like it says in Isaiah, that we've already went out and helped the survivors of the nations rebuild the cities. They've had 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. Are they still living in tents around the beloved city? Or is Satan attacking at Sukkot?
I like it.
Just like Antiochus attacked on Passover. Or on Sabbath.
I have a question.
What's that?
Are you of the mindset that stars are angelic beings?
I think whatever the lights in the sky that are the luminaries, the stars are set to control them. I don't think that they're like Care Bears shining down on the earth. You know what I'm saying? Like, serious. I'm serious.
Why so serious?
Yeah, I don't think that they're like physically exuding lights that shine. I think that they are in control of whatever those luminaries are. Just like I don't think the sun and the moon are an angel. I think that they're points of light in control of and regulated by angels.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that because I don't know. I just had this weird thought, and when you said I wonder what that would look like, I just had this image in my head pop up that if the luminaries themselves, if the stars were an angelic being, well, that's what it looks like because that's where they are. They're encamped. I don't know. I just thought that was pretty cool.
All the stars are in one spot in the sky.
Yeah.
This is weird.
I do have a question for you then, Sean. When we were doing some Bible reading during our Sukkot. And I will say this, the nice thing about Sukkoting with our Heavenly Father, or for them to be able to Sukkot with our Heavenly Father, is you don't have to worry about the weather, no mosquitoes, no flies.
Hey, man.
No snowstorms.
I might still be itching.
I was curious, just your thought on this real quick. In Job chapter 1, I think it starts off in verse 6, where it says, and the sons of God came to present themselves before the Father. Do you think that's, to me, I think that's possibly during a feast time?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
they're actually coming to present, because that's what we're supposed to do 3 times a year. The men are supposed to go and present themselves to the Father wherever he places his name. So we were just reading that during Sukkot. And I went, whoa, wait a minute. I said, this sounds like a feast day. Like there's a purpose for them to be presenting themselves before the Father. So
yes. That's the way I've always understood it. Even though it's vague, like in most of the translations in chapter 2, when it happens again, it'll say on another day they came to present themselves, and some translations will say on a certain day they came to present themselves before the Lord. And I've just always thought, well, Exodus 23 tells us 3 times a year you're supposed to present yourself to the Lord, you know, and these are his ways that he abides by in heaven. So yeah, this is probably a feast day of some sort, for sure.
Cool.
And Satan came with them, and then the Lord's like, "Oh, where'd you come from?" Which is like he typically doesn't show up. But the craziest part about all this is that he shows up, and like just it doesn't make sense if you believe in this Christianese concept of, oh, Satan was cast down, he was given horns, he was turned red, and then now
Right.
he can, you know, like he lives in the underworld with a pitchfork, and he's, you know, whenever there's an earthquake, it's because he's hitting the underbelly of the earth with his pitchfork. You know, it's like all that kind of nonsense of just this Dante's Inferno, Middle Ages myth concepts about Satan. But if you apply God's law consistently throughout the whole Bible,
Yep.
you realize that Satan may be judged that he cannot live, as his habitation has been taken from him. He cannot live in heaven anymore, but he can still go back if he wants, if he makes himself clean. Satan's not running around as some perpetual unclean demon. He's not a
Right.
demon. He's an angel. There's a difference. So if you consistently apply God's law throughout the whole Bible, you start to realize, oh, so Satan, like, this is why I've always said he is like the ultimate lawyer. He knows how to skirt the law enough so that he can bring deception to mankind, but not get destroyed immediately. And so it seems as there's specific moments where he's you know, he oversteps the line. He's not a habitual line stepper, but he is an occasional line stepper. You know what I mean? So like in as Jubilees tells us later in chapter 49, where he's held for 4 days so that the Israelites can leave that night. And then we also see in Revelation 20, it seems as he stepped over the line and he's held for 1,000 years, you know? And so, but before or in between all those times, it seems like he knows how to play the edges so that he doesn't truly get destroyed immediately by Michael or one of the other powerful angels. But also he can come present himself to God and say, hey, so I'm trying to tempt one of your boys down here on the earth. So, you know, I need some permission to do that. And it's just interesting to me because he can present himself to the Father if he's clean. He has the spiritual body to be able to go to that part of the creation.
Yep. I have my own personal theories on this, but I honestly think that that part of his curse was to do exactly what he's doing, as God cursed him to be. Now, since you were accused, or what you did in the garden, I think that was his curse. Part of his curse was, or is his curse, that now he has to do that as a job for the Father of testing all men's hearts.
Eating
And
dirt.
so when he shows up in the heavenly courts and God says, hey, where you been at? It's almost like he's like, you know where I've been. I've been doing the job that you assigned me to do now until my time of judgment comes. And he says, then, oh, really? Well, have you considered my boy Job? And so that's where that's me personally. I think that's part of his fall or his curse for what he did, was that now you've got to, this is going to be your job. So you did such a good job here of causing mankind to fall. Now I'm going to use you for my purpose. And then that's why we see later with Yeshua, you know, he's allowed to take Yeshua to that high place, wink, wink, to that high place and do all that tempting for 40 days and all that. So he's fulfilling now what part of, you know, guys, all right, this is going to be your job from here forth till the day of judgment. So that's my opinion. But
when I look at Job 1 real quick, though, it does say, like in verse 4 and 5, it says Job's sons would take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their three sisters to eat, drink. Verse 5, and when the days of feasting were over. So that's like the leading up context to verse 6, which says, on a certain day, the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord and Satan. So, like, if this is paralleled heaven and earth, very, very possible.
That was the same connection I was making at Sukkot. Was like, wait a minute, they're talking about basically feast days at the beginning of the chapter, giving us context going into now in the heavenly part. Now the sons of God are showing up and presenting themselves. So, yeah, good stuff.
Verse 7 in chapter 32, I just think it's interesting because it reminds me of, it says that, you know, Jacob gave him his vow, and it was the Lord who gave him his vow at the end of verse 7. And it just is interesting to me because it reminds me of Deuteronomy 8, 17 and 18, where Yahweh says, the power and strength of, do not say in your heart, the power and strength of my hands have made this wealth for me, but remember that it's the Lord your God who gives you the power to gain wealth in order to confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers even to this day. And so even though Jacob made the vow, I want to tithe to you for the rest of my life, he still needs Yahweh to make him prosperous so he can do that. So this is where he's giving thanks to Yahweh, like, oh, thank you. Like you allow me to fulfill this vow. And of course, Isaac, at the end of the previous chapter, like his last words to Jacob were like, make sure you fulfill that vow. You know, which is like, Deuteronomy 23, Numbers, what is it? Numbers, is it Numbers 29 or 30, you know, about fulfill your vows. And I think it's also mentioned again in Ecclesiastes, but it's just, it's funny that like that seems like some of the parting words of Isaac. Make sure you fulfill that vow you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've got to get moving along here, but I've got one thing I just want to ask about real quick. In verse 21 and 22.
That's where I was going. Good job.
Hey, it says, and he saw in a vision of the night, and behold, an angel descended from heaven with 7 tablets in his hand, and he gave them to Jacob, and he read them and knew all that was written therein, which would befall him and his sons throughout all the ages. And he showed him all that was written on the tablets, and said unto him, do not build this place, and do not make it an eternal sanctuary, and do not dwell here, for this is not the place. So I guess I'm just curious if there's anything else that we have that might can give some kind of, I don't know, correlation to this. You know, Torah will be written on our hearts, right? So he comes down with these 7 tablets. Jacob reads them, and he knows all that's in them. I mean, for all we know, they could be, you know, 2 sentences long on each tablet. I don't know. But I got to imagine there's a lot of information on these tablets. He knows everything that's going to happen, befall him and all his sons throughout all the ages. That's a lot of information, as well as sanctuary information and all this. There's a lot of stuff going on. So essentially, he was able to read through something and essentially just know all that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was essentially absorbed into him, however that looks. I don't know how to express that, but it sounds to me a lot like something being written on his heart. I just wanted to know what you guys thought.
It seems like a gift of wisdom to me, like a gift of the Spirit, right? So you know, was it Job 29:7? It's the breath of the Almighty that gives wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that's gift of the Spirit happens often for prophets,
And
so
knowledge.
they can. Yeah, so that otherwise the angel has to come explain something, right? Which is still considered a gift of Spirit because you're imparting wisdom given by God through a literal spirit. So it's to me, I've always wondered if this moment here and the information he saw thereon about his sons and all that would befall them throughout the ages to come, it made me think about, did this give him some sort of comfort to know that Joseph was still alive?
I think so, for sure. I think in the back of his mind, he always had that option still available. I think in his heart and his flesh, he was struggling. But I think in the back last file on the last row of the last shelf was, but I did see something that alludes to something different than what's happening right now.
Because again, Kyle, I agree with you. Like, I wish we could actually know what was supposedly on these tablets, right? But if it's about him and his sons, I mean, the 12 sons of Israel, you talking about those sons and all the prophecies in the future about Joseph? Like, talking about that, his name being a gate on the sanctuary that you're wanting to build? Like, just makes me wonder if he like took some sort of comfort here, going, oh, looks like my son's lineage is involved somewhere. That means he's alive out there somewhere.
Right.
I mean, that's just me just putting pieces together, but clearly the text doesn't say that. I've always wondered, right? Because, but Nick, we get to the following chapters that you guys have been reviewing in the 40s, where he's told that his son is still alive, that Joseph is still alive. He has a good reaction, but it seems, you know, less than stellar. So it just makes you wonder, you know, it's like how much interaction, visitation he's had from angels, how much that it's been affirmed to him over and over throughout the years that God's promises will come true for him. And this moment happened in chapter 32, many years earlier, before he found out Joseph was still alive. It just makes me wonder, you know,
Yeah, that, and he always had that dream in the back of his mind too about the wheat and the stars. You know, he was still included in there was a big number, still not a small number. So
that's right.
It was like,
and Simeon's taken captive for like a year, and you know, he's not freaking out. He's sad, but he's not freaking out. He's like, Simeon's a byword, as in, one of my sons has gone from me now. And you're just like, yeah, Simeon brought you some headache. I get it, but he's got a purpose to fulfill too. Like, his tribe is a part of this, of the 12 that bowed down to Joseph also. So yeah, it's interesting to me how it just makes you wonder kind of like it says in chapter 17 of Jubilees, where no, it doesn't. First Samuel, when it's about Hannah, about how she kept these things in her heart and remembered these things. It just makes you wonder if Jacob did that as well with some of these prophecies.
Yeah, seems like it.
Yeah,
especially if he knew everything that he read, you know.
Yeah. And for those of you that come on here and watch just when Sean is on here, he's not giving spoilers. If you want to see all that information, make sure to check out those other videos. We're already into the 40s, and we got some cool stuff on that.
So, oh, yeah. Did you guys release 41 recently?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Anyone watching, I highly recommend go watch that as well. It's a great conversation about Joseph and the brothers and everything involved. So go check that out.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah. And Kyle, as we wrap this chapter up, the one point I really wanted to hit on was in 27. It says, and he celebrated there yet another day, and he sacrificed thereon according to all that was sacrificed on the former days, and called its name addition, for this day was added. And the former days were called the feast. So we have that now, just like essentially permanent, set in stone now. And it's today. If we go look through our canon, there's nowhere where you get mentioned where this 8th day comes from, why we're celebrating it, why is it a Sabbath? Like, it's just kind of, just a thing we do. It's just there. It's right. A part of something somewhere along the way, maybe. Hopefully somebody got it right a long time ago, and we'll just trust them. Where, now we actually have a fact, a detail, a written words on pieces of paper that we can go point to and say, oh, this is why. And this is from Jacob. It's not just from some random guy along the way who decided, or some rabbi, who added along the way. It's, from the angels on the tablets to Jacob, patriarch, added, addition, the Sabbath day. This is why we're doing what we're doing. That's one of the things Pastor Joel always says is, know why you do what you do. Don't just do stuff, and this is a why moment. This is now we get our why.
Yeah. And specifically in that passage, it says the former days were called the feast.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen a lot of modern Torah observant people try to say, well, you don't need Jubilees to tell you that what the 8th day is, because it's just part of the feast. And I'm like, no, it's like, do the math. Go look in Leviticus and Numbers and do the math. There's an 8th day. Right. The feast is called 7 days. The Leviticus 23 and Exodus 20. This is a 7-day feast. But then in Numbers, it talks about the 8th day is also a Sabbath. And there's no explanation. It's not part of the former days that are called the 7-day feast. It's an 8th day. And I think it's wonderfully fitting, by the way, in this context of, from 16 to 29 in this chapter, Jacob gets renamed on this day. He gets renamed as Israel on this day. That's crazy prophetic. Like become like the addition coming into the house of God. Like, you get the moniker of the house of God put on you on the day of addition. Like, how amazingly beautiful. Because I've always felt like the day of addition feast was prophetic of the millennial reign. And like the moment that the 8th day, which would be this at the end of the millennial reign, the start, Satan attacks, Satan's killed. All the people that transgressed with him, that's the final circumcision. Then you got the great white throne judgment. Everyone's going to be resurrected and glorified and live forever. At that point, will have been. And then you go into eternity, inheriting the whole earth and all of heaven, and everything's unified. And that's the final day of addition, where you have the second resurrection, and all the people of the millennial reign that are still alive are brought into the house of God permanently through their glorified bodies. And evil's taken out. There's never a chance for an uncircumcised heart. It's the final countdown.
Oh, man, almost beat you to it.
You should have brought the synthesizer.
Yeah, that was one of the big things we brought up in the 40s chapters that we're into now. I can't remember if it was 41 or 42. I think it was 41. So, you've got in verse 17 here, and that may not be the first verse, but 17 right here, where it says, thy name shall not be called Jacob, but Israel shall they name thy name. Well, he's given this name here in 17, but even in 41 or 42, whichever one it is, I think it was 41, we hear about him still being referenced as Jacob. And I kind of correlate that to, he's Jacob until he makes the decision to go down into the land of Egypt, or send the sons, because now he is trusting and being obedient. He is walking in that Shema, and that's when it literally goes from one sentence calling him Jacob to the next sentence calling him Israel, right? And it's like, oh, you're Israel when you're trusting and obeying. You're Jacob when you're not. That's kind of what I got from it. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, there's an aspect of that. I think another aspect that I saw was more of like whenever he's being told to do something scriptural or biblical, or like something that's going to be accounted for, or he's moving on behalf of the whole family. Like, at this time it's 12, but it grows to be a bigger family. Those are the times when God's like, Israel. That means you and everybody go handle your business, and that way now he's a unit, not a individual. Because I think he's called Jacob all the time when he's doing good stuff. So I want to be careful to make sure he's saying, Jacob the sinner versus Israel the saint. I think it's I think there's a little bit of a distinction there. But yeah, for sure, it's definitely a grouping of like, these are my people. So hey, Jacob, you are in charge of my people. So I'm just going to call you all the people, and you know who I'm talking to.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, big, wonderful chapter, Feast of Edition. I think it's ironic to me that so many Torah observant people want to reject this book, yet they're observing the feast of God and making a big deal about it in their communities without even knowing the actual explanation for the end of Sukkot. Like that was the first thing. Like when I started coming to study the Feast of God, like almost 9 years ago now. Like I was like, wait, what is this? Like what? And I flipped back to Leviticus and flipped back to Exodus and go into Deuteronomy 16. And I'm like, what's this 8th day? Because I can count 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So, okay. So wait a minute. The 22nd is the 8th day, and I was like, all right. So it's just interesting to me that how has no one questioned this? I've never seen anybody do a video as much as the Torah algorithm I've been in for the last 8 years on YouTube. I've never seen anyone do a video on the Feast of Edition and how, nobody knew what it was or even calling it the Feast of Edition.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Nobody. It's just amazing to me how it's been completely overlooked. And simultaneously, they're rejecting the only ancient Israelite document that explains what it is. And with the tenor of, well, this isn't scripture. And I'm like, it doesn't, guys, what? Yeah. So that's you guys may have known, but recently I had to do I think it's been since the last time we had a chapter overview, but I had to do some exposition videos on why Jubilees is answering some arguments against Jubilees. And then my 4th installment in that little series, I provided 20 positive reasons why Jubilees is scripture.
Excellent job on that, by the way.
Some of those were just historical, the history of the early church fathers, historians who admit like this, they've believed it was scripture. They called it the apocalypse of Moses. Guys, can you imagine if instead of being called Jubilees, we referred to it as the apocalypse of Moses? You think people would take it a little bit more seriously if we called it the apocalypse of Moses?
Well, we can't relate it to Moses.
Like that's just, I mean, the cog dis on this one is mind blowing, because it does have the history of manuscript custody. It does have the testimony of quote unquote church fathers in history, and even historians like George Syncelus, this Greek historian who wrote the chronograph or whatever, basically a history book in the 8th century, a Greek history book, used Jubilees as a huge source for his history book. And it's admitted so in his explanation of his history book. And no one in his day said, how dare you use some fake book? You know what I mean? Like they knew it was the apocalypse of Moses. Right. It was one of the writings of Moses. Like it just blows my mind how the irony, like this is the ultimate troll. This is what Satan does, right? He takes the Pharisees who say, well, we uphold the writings of Moses, but then they teach you something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? We uphold the writings of Moses, but this book over here, Jubilees, which is actually one of his writings, we're going to throw that one out.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's absolute troll in the faith. I've jokingly said in the past that the whole Catholic system has been a longstanding troll in the faith, but they're just late to the game. The Pharisees beat them to it a long time ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry for the rant, but
no worries.
It bugs me when I don't see the same level of dedication to scholarship and to scriptural analysis applied to this book that is applied to other things. And this is why, unfortunately, many of the arguments that come against this book reveals how little the people making those arguments know the actual Torah itself. And that's the part where it gets extremely awkward.
Right.
Mhm.
Or even yet, the ones that are hypercritical of this book will just loosey-goosey some of the other books that
Yeah.
shouldn't be, considered scripture, in my humble opinion,
Yes.
for whatever that is. So I agree. I find that very odd.
It's weird standards.
Yeah, and Sean, speaking of Moshe, when we get into chapter 33, what does it say in verse 18 there? It says, "And do thou, Moses, write it down."
Write it down for Israel. Yeah.
That's it.
They may observe
I'll
it.
give Cal some time to catch up with me. Write it down for Israel that they may observe it and do according to these words and not commit a sin unto death. For Yahuwah our Elohim is judge who respecteth not person and accepteth not gifts.
Mm.
So as we go through Jubilees, a lot of times I think we can kind of get lost in the fact that this is Moses. This is Moses right here. This is Moshe. And then all of a sudden, every now and then, we'll get a little clip of, and Moses. Oh, by the way, this is about Moses, people. So, or Moses writing this down. So, hey, Moses, don't forget, write this down. So it's like right in here, there's like this little chapter break where Moses is brought back into the picture a little bit.
Right.
Just to remind everybody, by the way, this is the angel of presence speaking to Moses to do these things. So,
good stuff.
It's truly sobering, in my opinion, as far as, just realizing, wait a minute, what are the book claims to be written by Moses? By Moses, not ascribed to Moses, which is the tradition of Judaism. They ascribe the first 5 books, Genesis to Deuteronomy, but this one literally claims authorship by Moses.
Right.
Like that, there's no other book that I know of.
Nope.
So I feel like you should definitely take this one seriously, as far as get to know what it actually says before you throw it out with the bathwater. Don't throw baby Moses out with the bathwater. Throw him in the Nile.
I think it's interesting too that when we see these little breaks in the fourth wall, right? It's like you're getting a history lesson, you're getting a story as if this book is super duper extra old, and then you're like, oh, by the way, Moses still on the mountain writing. This is a zoom into current time, and then now back to the story. And it's interesting that when these moments happen, they're really big moments in like the history lesson. So this angel or a group of angels are sitting there talking to Moses, telling him, he's like, hey, by the way, Reuben made a big boo-boo. And I'm going to tell you what happened. And I'm sorry that I even have to discuss this with you. This should never have been. But since I'm going to tell you, Reuben had defiled her. So this wasn't she was innocent and he did, there's no he said, she said. I'm telling you exactly what happened. We're spiritual beings watching the things go down. So he thought he was being sneaky over here, crouching by the brook, by the river. He wasn't sneaky. We know everything that was going on. So let's not get any kind of sideways stories here. Let's just set the record straight. But while I'm doing that, it says verse 12, and again it is written a second time, cursed is the man. And then in 13, and do thou Moses. So he's like, hey, let me just jump in here real quick, Moses. This was such a big deal. You had better never do this. And then, you know what? Might as well go ahead and command all the people to never do this. And then in 14, for no man who does this is permitted to stay alive, even one day. So this is like let me make sure I clarify, and then clarify once more, and then double down on the clarify. Okay, now back to the story.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like a next level disrespect of dishonoring your father.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it calls it abomination and unclean. There's not a lot. I mean, there's more than we think when you actually go and Google or search, however you search, what are the abominations in the Bible? It's a lot more than the few things you've heard growing up. But this is one of those things where I want to make sure abomination. This is a 100% no-go. God does not sign off on this, does not condone this, will not give you a pass on this. Abomination.
Yeah.
Jonathan, what's funny is when you said, Reuben messes up, and it's funny because if you can pull verse 10 back up for us, Kyle, whenever there's these warning labels or things that are written and you go, why would you have to tell me not to eat a Tide Pod? or whatever it is. Why would you have to? Why do we need these? Throughout life, there's all these little monikers of things written. They're like, and by the way, do not drink gasoline. By the way, do not. All these things. You're like, oh, this is like common sense,
Right.
and you get to this, and you feel like you're living in a time where it's like, okay, the discussion in the heavenlies is like somebody messed up. All right, now we got to write it down because we can't have anybody else doing it. So after this, it says, for this reason. Actually, I'll back up just a little bit in the 9. It says, and Reuben had defiled her, and as for any man who uncovereth his father's skirt, his deed is wicked exceedingly, for it is abominable. It is abominable before Yahuwah. For this reason, it is written and ordained on the heavenly tables that a man should not lie with his father's wife, and should not uncover his father's skirt, for this is unclean. They shall surely die together, the man who lieth with his father's wife, and the woman also, for they have wrought uncleanness on the earth. So again, it's one of those things where I think through time something happens like, okay, we have to write this down. This has to be the warning label for this is not acceptable whatsoever.
Yeah, there was some TikTok trend a couple years ago where people were burning themselves, and so yeah, it's like should be common sense, but
right. Or
sometimes.
taking like a big scoop of cinnamon and trying to see if you can like literally swallow a whole, it's like people coughing on
Don't do that.
all the cinnamon everywhere, and some people I think unfortunately passed away from it. So I'm sure somewhere they're like, should we put a warning label on a bottle of cinnamon now? Like, please do not ingest, like handful or spoonfuls of this or whatever. But
It's sad. Common sense isn't so common anymore. So
right.
Correct.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Reuben made a big mistake. It was not by accident. It gives you the lead up. He saw her naked, spurred some thoughts in him. He acted on those thoughts. This is what the kids nowadays would call intrusive thoughts. And and so now he's finding himself in a situation where basically Moses has been, I don't think we get a conversation as far as with Jacob, as far as an angel telling Jacob, I want to kill Reuben. But I don't think we get that. But we get later down the road Moses being told the backstory of, by the way, here's what Reuben did. We wanted to kill him. And but we realized that they didn't realize, but basically we're explaining to you why we didn't kill him. This particular law was not given to man on the earth yet. And so this is, while we think in Genesis, we think that this story is just like, dude, why? Like, this is some serious dirty laundry here. Why are you putting this in there? Especially if he didn't get any consequence out of it, right? I mean, yes, there were earthly consequences. Bilhah had to separate from Jacob. Her life changed. There's earthly consequences. The testament of Reuben gives you his heart, how he was ashamed to look his father in the eye for a long time. So there's earthly consequences. But I mean, like, you think like, wow, doesn't Leviticus say you can't do this and you should be killed? Like, how did Reuben get away with this? So the angel's explaining, like, this is how he, quote unquote, didn't get the punishment that we're explaining in the law you should get, is because we haven't given this one yet, because no one done this yet.
Right.
So yeah, that's wild. So if you want to get into the debate of Calvinistic determinism versus open theism, here's a great passage for you.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. It's kind of like you get the law with an asterisk beside it, and then they're like, let me explain though why, what, how. This shouldn't. I don't know why we have to tell you this. Like, I don't even understand what you were thinking. But since we have to tell you, here's kind of the deal. And then in verse 19, it talks about it's uncleanness, it's abomination, it's contamination, and a pollution. So those verses were interesting to me. I mean, those words, and I was like, man, I mean, he really went in to make sure, like, all bad, like not a possibility of like a redeeming quality of this action. And then before this is all super duper codified, we see Reuben go up in the family tree, and then we see Judah go down in the family tree, and both are labeled exactly the same. Both have the same words of pollution and contamination, and both were like, listen, here's what happened. Okay, so I know you probably heard rumors. You know what? One of you kids might even have been born in one of these situations. Yeah. So here's the deal. No, it's not okay. Reuben he didn't hear about it, so that's where he, not like you said, Sean, didn't get the pass. But this is why things occurred the way they did. And the same thing with Judah. It was like, well, technically, none of the sons had ever slept with her. But then also there was some ignorance and you know, it gives you like a little bit of the backstory. So it's not like because God is going to be just. So, you know, we can't read the scriptures and be like, oh, he's showing partiality. I thought I read that he's no respecter of man, but because you're one of the 12, you get a pass. Like, no. Let me explain to you why this transpired the way it did. And no, it is not okay. Never do this. Don't try to think you can tempt fate and be like, well, I'm gonna see if I can be a Judah or a Reuben. No, don't do those. Just in case you were wondering, don't do that.
Yeah.
But let me explain to you how this all went down.
So the whole concept of the judgment that does not happen on Reuben in this story, I think, is missed in Genesis. And I think this is why Jubilees is so powerful to explain this part, because how many times in the fullness of the law and the prophets have we seen angels come to exact the judgment of the Father from heaven? Because it was not being done on the earth. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because you have in Israel on the earth, you would have them, you remember like in Deuteronomy 13, it has to remind the people, do not let your hand with show too much mercy, but make sure you're the first one to throw the stone. Like when justice needs to happen, make sure you do it. Don't be a coward. Make sure you follow through. It's going to hurt. It's going to be painful, but this is the consequence of sin, right? So otherwise, you're going to allow mercy, too much mercy to happen,
Right.
you know, and then you're going to allow evil to reign, which we see happens later. You know what I'm saying? That in multiple instances throughout the history of Israel, it happens a lot. So in this moment here, the angels show up and they could have exacted justice, but they're also explained. Like, I love the fact that they're showing like, but there's some common sense involved here, right? Like there's mercy extended to him because it wasn't a sin of ignorance, that's for sure. He definitely did it on purpose. But because we had not told him, because it hadn't been explicitly spelled out, we're showing mercy. God is showing mercy. The angels are just agents of the Father. God is showing mercy to Reuben. He's going to be alive, you know, and it's not because he's a respecter of persons. It's because he respects his law. You know what I'm saying? So that's what's interesting, though, is that later, you know, it reminds me of the whole too much is given, much is expected kind of concept, you know, as far as like, oh, you're not given the full word. Now that we have the full words of God and you're reading them and you're understanding what them, then more is expected of you, because there is no ignorance there that the Father has to overlook sins committed in ignorance. So it's interesting how the Father, as the fullness of the law is given, there's now a greater expectation of obedience with judges on the earth as well as angelic judges to step in and enforce things when they're told to, because they're all still going to be within the parameters of what God says is good, righteous, and holy. So it's just interesting to see, like, what would cause the Father to not allow this specific instruction to have already been given? Is it just because no one did it? Did he know Reuben was going to do this in the future? Like, you get into all this guesswork, you know, as far as like, was him not giving this like the pass, you know, of allowing Reuben to stay alive so this tribe could stay alive and be a part of the 12 tribes? It's interesting. It's just really interesting to see. And like, is there, okay, let me say this the right way. In the writings of Enoch that we don't have, clearly what we have left over are fragments of scrolls. So in the fullness of those writings there, and just like we talked about in Jubilees 21, where Abraham said, I read all this priestly duties in the writings of Enoch. Well, I haven't seen that anywhere. And what's left of first Enoch that we still have today, passed down through history. So what other stuff was in there that's not passed down through history and given to us that we don't know about that could have been? Like, is Moses just getting like a replica of everything that Enoch had already said, as far as priests, temple duty, mobile temples, how to do stuff, understanding the seasons, how to obey them? Because it's interesting to me, because what we have left today, I'm sorry, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm trying to get to this concept of the Father revealing certain things out of mercy, and then other times once they're revealed, he does expect obedience, right? Even if there's a death penalty involved. But there's incredible mercy shown to people even when there's a death penalty involved for sins unto death. Like David, Yahweh knew what David did, although the people, you would say the people on the ground didn't know, but I have a hard time with that one too, right? Because of all the servants, the people in the castle, the palace where David lives, bringing another man's wife into the palace, and it's not one of it. Like, did they just Did they just have to like look at the list of the 700 wives and been like, yeah, I don't recognize this one. Wait, who is this one again? That's Sheba? Is she on the list? Maybe she's in the 600s. Get that scroll. You know what I mean? It's like, you're like, I don't, she didn't have a date with him tonight. I don't remember this. So it just makes you wonder, like, it's hard for me to believe there was no accountability on the ground, but then the Father, through the prophet Nathan, brings in the heavenly accountability to David of like, oh, by the way, what you've done has been seen. We know what you've done. You're not getting away with this. But he's not killed instantly. Like Ananias and Sapphira are killed instantly. Like, that's rough. They're dragging the husband's body out, and then boom, she falls. You're like, that's rough. That's like heavenly divine justice that happens. So all I'm getting at is like, there's these moments of extreme mercy to where the Father's like, I have expectations of obedience to you, and I can't say that I'm perfect in interpreting which ones he would be merciful towards and which ones. I'm surprised by Ananias and Sapphira about them having divine justice and being killed in the spot. I'm surprised by that. Why not give them a chance to repent? You know, but I'm just going to trust that God knows what he's doing. You know what I'm saying? So with all that said, I think about First Enoch in this moment here, because I'm like, all right, if there's pieces of the law that were not yet revealed to mankind on earth, but then we see all this stuff in Enoch that was revealed that you have to have in order to obey all the important piece of God in the first 5 books. Otherwise, you don't know how to obey any of those feasts and know the days and the hours, and otherwise you get all this guesswork and the multiple different lunar calendar observances that you have today, where people are guessing.
Right. They
don't really know how to observe all these things, and so it just makes me wonder of like, and a big picture. This small example of Reuben and Bilhah in a big picture is how it's almost as if the Father's like, look, I know you're only going to have fragments of Enoch. I know how much scribal ementation is going to happen to my word over the years. I know that you're going to have pieces of fragments. I know that you're going to have books entirely lost to history, like Book of the Wars. I know that there's going to be things that I've had prophets write down that will not last throughout history. But what will remain through history is enough so that you can walk with me, and I'll still resurrect you, and you can still walk with me in faith. Because we clearly don't have all the words that were given through all the prophets over time. We just clearly don't. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we should be able to say that out loud and not feel shame as Christians. You know, that's just the fact of how much the enemy has tried to squash the word of God throughout the centuries. So with all that, the Father knows he's still merciful. He's still loving. He's like, look, I have all rights to kill Reuben, but I didn't. He's like, he's showing you guys, look, I have all rights to kill him. So in this weird, it reminds me of what Christ said, you tie the cumin, the mint, and the spice, but you forgot justice, mercy, and righteousness. You know, it's like the Father, his heart isn't about wanting to pin you with his law, right? People take Romans 6 way out of context. The Father's not trying to pin you down with his law. It's just a law that's meant to bring life, instead brings death. Instead, he's trying to show you, here's the guidelines. I want you to do as best you can. Put your heart towards me, and in the future, I'm going to let you follow all this faithfully and perfectly in the new covenant, fulfilling this, your new resurrected body, incorruptible, and laws are in your heart and mind, and you'll do it forever perfectly. But right now, show me your best in practice. You know what I mean?
Amen.
And so I just think this story seems a little scandalous. It seems a little like out of place, both in Jubilees and in Genesis, right?
Yeah.
But there's this massive, massive show of God's mercy through this story.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, Sean, real quick on that one, I think we can go back to Romans 4:15 on that one as well. Where there is no Torah, there is no transgression of the Torah.
For sure. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny because, it's like almost like, well, mercy didn't show up until Yeshua came on the scene. Well, clearly, not true. We're seeing grace and mercy all throughout the Old Testament. And Sean, to some of your points, it says that, God knows our heart. And I think in these moments, God knows the heart of the man. So Ananias and Sapphira, he's like, oh, I know your heart. You did this on a whole nother reason. We're like, maybe with Reuben or other situations like David, hey, you're still a good dude. You just had a mess up. Where, these other guys were like, oh, you were actually intending on evil. You did, your heart wasn't even in line. This wasn't a mess up. This was you did it wrong. You're bad.
Intentional.
Yeah. And I do wonder sometimes with the laws how they're not given, and some are like given later. It's not like God's changing his mind or adding things. He's like, oh no, I always had this. But like I think there's two different alternatives. One, this should never happen. Like I don't even know how you found this alternative in your brain that you went to go sleep with one of your mom. Like that should never even have been a possibility. So I'm not going to give you like it's almost as though he's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? But then also the other side of it is with us humans, all humans, we are expert loophole finders, right? If you tell us, hey, here's the law, we're going to be like, okay, so if sundown's at 7:01, then I can go out to eat until 7 o'clock. Or, if sunrise is a da 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 da, then my Sabbath technically doesn't start until blah blah blah. We love to find loopholes and the little minute details that, well, I don't have to because, well, but technically it said lamb, so if I have one bite, then I'm good, right? And you're like, dude, it said it's a meal, so you have to eat, and you can't just have one bite and walk away. That's not how that works. But it's just, I think we're expert loophole finders. So if he were to give us all the rules in advance, he's like, all right, so if it's my mom, but then she got divorced, and then he's like, no, none of that. Just stop with the stuff. So then now he's like, okay, since your mind is clearly doing evil, let me give you the hard and fast rule with no exceptions. And next time you do this, dead. And I think it was one of those, like, if I give you all the rules up front, you're gonna try to break them, which we do all the time. Every rule in the Bible, someone's broken it because that's why it's a rule. And I think the more rules, commands, laws, the more ways that we can sin. Like Joe read the verse, if you don't have the law, then you can't sin. He's like, but now that you have it, especially in our modern world, we have as much as there's ever been that we could, at least that we know of. Maybe they had some more back then when it was lost along the way, but we truly don't have any excuses. We've got it translated in all the different languages, and we got the blue letter, the da 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 da. The list goes on to all the resources we have. So he's like, I got to hold you guys accountable. So don't watch what you do, check what you're seeing.
I think this was an intentional thing. I think it's a way for the Father to give not only just give the law, but have something to show. This is why this is a bad thing, but also to show this idea of mercy and grace throughout all these older stories before we have a Mount Sinai type situation, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a unified story from Genesis to Revelation. It's a way that it all comes together, and I personally, that's what I think it is. I think that's why it wasn't given from was it there? Yes, it was. It's always been there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But has it always been shared with us? That's a different story, right? So we get these little lessons on how to apply things, why we do and why we don't do things. So yeah, I mean, if we didn't have these stories, if we didn't have these life lessons, if we didn't have these examples of these men and women who lived these things out, our patriarchs and our matriarchs, that's all we would have is just a rule book, and that's not the relationship our Father wants with us. He doesn't want us to just have a rule book. Can you imagine having a child and teaching them to read, and as soon as they're able to read, set them down and say, all right, here's the rule book. Don't break any of these ever, or you're going to have to deal with the wrath. No, there's lessons that have to be learned. There's a relationship there. It's a father and child relationship, or father and daughter relationship that has to be built. And a lot of those things take life lessons. He knows us better than we know ourselves, So I think it's a beautiful thing.
When do we grow out of being a child?
Yeah.
Hopefully never.
Yeah. But we become the perfected child at the resurrection.
There you go.
Yeah. So actually, I was looking back in Jubilees 28 because looking at the breakdown of the sons being born to these 4 women. I'm wondering if you look at Leah had 4 children first, and then that prompted Rachel to be jealous and then offer up Bilhah.
Mm-hmm.
So Leah's first 4 that she birthed was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. So that means how many years before Bilhah had Dan, which was the 5th born son? And how old is Reuben, the firstborn of Leah, looking at the servant girl of Rachel?
Oh
That's
yeah,
what- yeah.
I'm totally thinking they were roughly the same age. Or
That
So-
was my thoughts as well. They're very
Yeah.
close in age. It wasn't like he was looking at a 7-year-old woman.
Right.
You know?
Well, just thinking he may have had an attraction much longer than just in this moment he saw her naked. Like
Right.
it could have been like, I grew up with this girl, we blossomed together. Where'd she come from?
Right.
This handmaid that was given to Rachel, is she just one of the extended children from the other people that aren't named that are hanging out with Jacob and his crew? Like it just makes you wonder, like where did she come from? And at what point, how old is Reuben by the time that Bilhah is given as a wife? There's just so many, like this would make the ultimate backstory for some sort of sappy Lifetime movie.
Right.
But where God comes in and does the non-lifetime thing and brings judgment.
Mhm.
So
And another thing to support that too was we had just spoken earlier about how everybody were kind of going and doing their thing, right? We had the 12-year-old that was going after to find her brothers, right? So they're all a little feral. They're all kind of running around doing their own thing, and so yeah, they probably had some time to hang out and chit chat and get to know each other, and yeah, it didn't work out good.
and I also wondered if Reuben was married at this time, because we don't get to see Reuben's wife until Jubilees chapter 34, verse 20.
Mm.
So I'm just wondering, it doesn't say exactly when he got married, and who knows?
All right, well, let's get into 34, but before we do that, I got one more thing in 33 to pull up, and it's real quick though, and that is in verse 23. I just think that this is really cool because we hear so much about the patriarchy, especially those that want to put down scriptures, but we hear so much about the patriarchy, and people don't really take the time to really look and see the respect that's given to the matriarchy. In verse 23 here, this is after giving all the sons of, right here, the sons of Jacob, the firstborn Reuben, and all their children and all that kind of good stuff. And it says, and they came and bowed themselves down to Isaac and Rebekah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, I think that was, it's very intentional that that's there, I believe.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it says in another part in Jubilees, it says Rebecca was a righteous woman.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, from some of our earlier chapters, we definitely gave Rebecca the A+.
Oh yeah.
I did joke though.
Mom of the century.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's mama forever almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that list of the sons that came with Jacob to bow down, Joseph and Benjamin are not born yet, right?
No, it says, and the sons of Rachel, Joseph, and
They are born. Okay.
Joseph
Yeah,
and Benjamin, and the
born,
sons of Bilhah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So the whole crew's here.
Yep.
They're probably just young.
Right.
Very, very young. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Because in the next section, which we're about to get into, they don't get to go. They don't get to go fight.
Oh yeah, that's
Right.
right. Yep.
Right. So, chapter 34, the war of the Amorite kings against Jacob and his sons, and some other stuff.
These Amorites just don't learn their lesson, man.
They sure don't.
Just constantly, just gluttons for punishment.
Yeah, we had a good time when we was covering this chapter here. There was all kind of cool stuff to cover about this war and the different nations that they were going up against, and their names and what they meant and all that kind of stuff. It was really cool.
I wonder what kind of trees these are where they can hide themselves under the trees and then spring out and take cattle.
What verse are we looking at? Oh, verse 2?
Verse 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jubilees 34:2. I'm guessing it was the men in the army of the kings of the Amorites and not the actual 7 kings themselves. Because it's kind of like a comical scene if it's actually the 7 kings themselves springing out like, oh, give me that cow. Like it's, they're all trying to wrestle a big cow and take it away. No, I'm guessing it was their army that was hiding behind these trees, or it says under the trees. So again, like what kind of tree allows you that kind of coverage? Is this like a molasses tree that blossoms out and falls down, or like a weeping willow or something, or like, I don't know. It's interesting to me.
Or like these big giant trees here in Charleston and Savannah area, these big, it was the one here called the angel tree, the branches and roots go all the way down to the ground. They're like 6 feet, tall and all that craziness. But I also wondered too, were they like up in the tree, you know, like on the
Yeah.
lower branches, and they were under the, you know, the rest of the tree, and then they jumped down.
Or were there lookouts and maybe they were just literally underneath trees where the lookouts couldn't see them?
Right.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Or, you know, since we're throwing out the oars, maybe they're just, you know, part of the Hobbit family and they could just all fit underneath there together. I don't know.
Or maybe they're
Right.
tunneling, you know? I don't know.
I know that's another thing I'm thinking. I'm
Mole
like,
man.
are we? What is this under the trees? Like, did they really? Because you know they do build big tunnels back then. They had underground cities, and they had. So it was like, did they just build like a big tunnel and open up the ramp and just have all the
reach
cows just go down under?
Yeah.
and then Jacob just turns around and is like, wait, where'd that entire herd go over there? They're just all underground mooing. I don't know, but
Kind of makes you. Sorry, kind of makes you wonder about the evil folks today that are doing stuff with tunnels and things. Wonder if they're mimicking or even just using the same old tunnels that were there.
Well, you know, I mean, in Turkey, they have that city they found that supposedly could house like 40,000 people, an underground city. You know, obviously we have Amos 2:9. Though you may dig into Sheol, though you may ascend to heaven. You know, so it's like tunneling was a thing back then. You know, it wasn't the mines of Moria, but it was tunneling for sure.
Right. Yeah, you stole my thought on that one.
Well, I do want to correct a statement that I made a minute ago. It says in verse 3 and 4, or no, just 3. It says, and Jacob and Levi and Judah and Joseph were in the house with Isaac their father, for his spirit was sorrowful, and they could not leave him. And Benjamin was the youngest, and for this reason remained with his father. So it's telling me that Benjamin remained for sure, but I guess Joseph went with him. I didn't remember that. Yep.
Well, something else I didn't remember, Kyle, if you go to the very first word / plural word in verse 11, this is one of those ones that I can't stop looking at. It's how many letters are in that word?
Kind of looks like it all runs together, don't it?
Yeah, it looks like a debate speech right there.
And they do it treacherously.
So, you know, when you see this this time come up where, you know, it's like Jacob and the sons, we always view Bible people, at least in my head, at least, you know, from like Sunday school and little coloring books or whatever, they're all just wearing robes, walking around with a staff and looking at animals, right? They're just kind of doing stuff. There's a fire in the background, they're hanging out. But you know, these guys are fighting. They're handling their business at the highest level, right? These 12 boys, while they've sinned and done all their stuff, they tried to get rid of Joseph, all these other issues. These 12 boys survived everything, right? Like they didn't lose one person to any kind of sickness. They didn't lose anybody to war. You know, they're battling whole kings and nations, and the daughter's gone for a little bit. They figure that out. All these things are going on. I just think it's just important for us to remember that, you know, God's not looking for like monks and, you know, like hill people. He's looking for actual real people, real men and women that are going to go out and serve him. And they're going to be a light to the nations, and they're going to exact judgment when needed, but they're also going to live in accordance with his word. These guys ate clean. They lived clean. They served the Most High, and they did what they were really supposed to do. And when there was opposition, if it was God's will, if it was, you know, the Father's will, they went out and handled business. And, you know, how often in our world today is it's very much that pacifist mindset, which is true. You know, God, you know, Yeshua says, blessed are the peacemakers, but he said, I also came to bring a sword. You know, so he's like, I want you to understand there's a duality to our faith walk. And I think the 12 tribes are like super, super examples of the duality. Sometimes they're just doing Sukkot. Next time, taking out a whole kingdom. And it's all those were blessed by God.
Yep, let me do a double correction here on myself. I gotta put a reverse on the reverse there.
If you keep doing this, Kyle, they're gonna have to like rewrite some of the heavenly tablets of heaven.
No, man, I am so sorry. So
it's not a game of Uno.
I was correct in my original thought that Joseph and Benjamin didn't go. And if we go over here to verse 10, it says, and in the 7th year of this week, he sent Joseph to learn about the welfare of his brothers. Mm-hmm. So Joseph was not there. So both of those were held back. Okay. Correction made. Tell me all about it in the comments, guys.
Well, I was trying to do
reverse cards.
I was trying to do the math. It says in verse 3, Jacob, Levi, Judah, Joseph, and Benjamin. So obviously Joseph, Benjamin, Levi, and Judah are with Jacob when he gets this news about these Amorites have surrounded. Verse 5 says, the kings of the Amorites have surrounded your sons and plundered their herds. So that means you've got Reuben, Dan, Zephyr, or Asher, Zebulon, Naphtali, all the rest of them, Gad, and then it says he, and this answers our question from earlier, from verse 31. It says he arose as Jacob and his 3 sons, that's Levi, Judah, and Joseph, and all the servants of his father and his own servants, and went against them 6,000 men. So we don't get the breakdown, but clearly, I'm guessing Jacob had a couple thousand with him.
And that was verse 6.
Verse 34:6.
6, yeah.
Yeah, because he's combining his father Isaac's servants with his own, and together it's 6,000 men. So even if you cut it down the middle, 3,000 each, it's a lot of people to roll with to go down to Bethel and go down for Sukkot and celebrate.
There's a the note that we have in the one that we're reading from here on the screen. It says that there is another reading, I guess another translation or whatever, claims that there's 800, but instead of 6,000. But I believe the 6,000 is correct. I'm not. We addressed that in our video, didn't we, guys?
Yeah. And we said either 6,000 total, or what it was even the possibility of 800,000 instead of the 6. But I don't think that one's possible. That's too many.
That's a whole lot.
And the thing we don't get, which I wish we did get, is the number of the enemy. You know, because clearly Jacob's crew won, but how many was he going against? 7 kings? How many people is that? You know,
I mean, to be a king, you have to have a kingdom.
Right. So, and of course they had to pay tribute to them afterwards. Right. So now he's like Lord of the land. They're all subjugated to him now.
Yeah.
It's like Jacob, of course, doesn't have this personality because he's not Esau, but it's like, you know, please attack me, please.
Right.
Please. So then I'll have you pay tribute for the rest of your life to me. Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And that tribute was paid all the way until they went down to Egypt.
That's right. Yeah.
So that means that's a huge fact. You know, that's like, okay, so God's like, I'm going to take care of you however I want to. And if the enemies want to be dumb, then they'll pay you. It's fine. You're going to get fed no matter what.
All right.
Yeah, that's wild. And of course, it happens in Shechem. And the pastors of Shechem. Again, you guys not learning your lesson with these boys of Israel yet? It's like, come on. I guess they were still mad from, Shechem and earlier.
Yeah.
But
Sean, you made a few references to the Lord of the Rings there. When we went through the testament of of Judah, and when he was describing his fighting the Nephilim type creatures and throwing ox with one arm and everything else, and you realize these boys didn't play at all. Like when they came to battle, these again, Jonathan, you're talking about. I think it was Judah brought up about them, thinking there's these little shepherd boys, or just these timid little people living out in the desert somewhere. Like, no, when it came to battle, I mean, I think they're taking a playbook from the patriarch of Abraham. Abraham went out there, 318, and took on multiple kingdoms and came out victorious. And I mean, man was 75 years old. And so this family was not to be messed with or played with or anything else. When they take their sister Dinah, they go in there and take care of business. They're like, we're not playing with you guys. This is wrong, and you're going to pay for what you did. And here you see the Amorites again, Sean, showing up, going, and you're like, don't you ever learn your lesson? I mean, this never works out well for you at all. But you see what it's like. Jacob's like looking at the boys, going, all right, you guys ready? All right, Joseph, you're going to go study because you're going to be the next high priest. And Benjamin, sorry, but you're just too young. But the rest of us, we're going to take care of business. And this would make a great movie to me. Like the stuff that we read between the 12 patriarchs and Jubilees and Genesis and in the book of Enoch. If you were, I mean, that would make the Lord of the Rings look pale. Yeah, it would be weak, man. I mean, I've always thought if they could just take they take all the knowledge of these books. Go ahead, Sean. Yeah. I know you want to say something.
Especially if you directed the movie in the form of Moses on the mountain, with flashbacks of all this stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Ooh, good call.
Like
Exactly.
that's the moment where like it's like the Benjamin Button of the never-ending story, where instead of the kid sitting with his grandfather here in the fable, it's Moses with the angel at the end of his life here in the history
Yes.
of this amazing event of the patriarchs and how God brought them through, and his law was being observed, and they overcome great feats. And by the way, the whole point of this, Moses, is that we're directly taking you back into this hotspot.
Yeah.
Saying where all these battles happened, where all this chaos happened, where your forefathers defended God's ways and lived amongst these heathens, taking you right back in, man.
Yeah.
So, but guess what? You now have like a couple million people with you. You have formalized armies happening, like, and it's a totally different game, So, and of course, Joshua is just sitting there in the backdrop listening.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to make an absolutely amazing movie.
I mean, you couldn't stop at just 4 parts either. This would be ongoing.
Oh yeah.
For a long time.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I don't think that these guys were, little boys, but at the same time, I also like to lean on the idea that, Yah is with them. And if it means
absolutely, yeah.
Yah needs to grant them this, the spirit of strength to toss an oxen around, then that's what he's going to do, So
Right.
that's kind of what I lean towards. But at the same time, either way is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I don't think that they were, giants, but, as far as the way DNA works and all that, I'd say they probably were at least. We know they aged better than we do, so they probably grew better than we do too. But
Yeah.
But definitely not giant status. Probably I wouldn't put them there.
But and I'm more meant, we weren't the guys just walking around with the buzzed bowl cut and the Bible in hand and walking slow everywhere, with the candle. It's just
there was some incense swinging back and forth. Yeah,
exactly. But what's interesting about that is we know Benjamin was the baby, so it was kind of obvious he's not going to be in here. He's going to be handling business. And you're like, well, why didn't Joseph go? I think Joseph was being trained up. He was not that he was too young, not that he was too weak or any of that stuff. He was like, hey, you're handling the business of the family. You're picking up where dad's leaving off. And so everybody else is going to fight. And I think that's why we see the brothers kind of treat him the way they do. Like they just got done fighting. They're hot, they're sweaty, they're annoyed. The gnats and the mosquitoes, they got to him already. They're having to deal with all this stuff. And then here comes, nicely dressed, clean out of the kitchen, having a good meal. Joseph, hey, dad sent me to go check on you guys. How is it? And they're like, you know what? You don't even know. You have no idea what we just had to go through. Throw him in the pit. You know what I mean? It's like, you kind of wonder. I've always wondered, like, where this aggravation, this aggression came from. It was just like out of the blue. They're like, we don't love you anymore. Bye. There had to have been something. And I think it's this battle, this life that they're kind of living. It's like they all bowed before Isaac and Rebecca. You're like, okay, cool. They're all together. Now all of a sudden it's babies at home. They're like, baby gets a pass because he's the baby. But Joseph, hey man, this ain't fair. Like, we are putting our lives on the line for the family. What are you doing? Not realizing Joseph, what he's doing actually is the reason that they're, going to be receiving atonement. The reason they're not going to die of starvation. The reason that, he's acting as the savior priest character for the whole family. And they're more focused on the physicality of the paying tribute, the food, and the wars and the battles. And they're not understanding that the spiritual things, the weightier matters are being handled at home. And so they're like, you know what? I think that's what it is. I think they're just upset. They're salty. They're frustrated. And they're just like, we were better off without you. We don't need the spiritual leader, dude. We just need more warriors. So if you're not going to be a warrior, then you can get out of here.
Yeah, this is a big chapter. So much here. Did y'all talk about Rebel and Temnatares? Like the cities? It looks like Jacob built those cities.
I don't remember if we mention those.
I don't think we did.
34/8. So I just wonder what those cities, if those are still landmarks that people know of today, if what those cities were in history.
Oh yeah, we did talk about that. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I know we talked about the city. Did we talk about him building them?
I don't remember that, but if we did,
I don't remember us talking about building them though.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Built 2 cities.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Of course, we get in the story of Joseph, which is a huge, massive story. I know you guys have been reviewing it right now.
Yeah, the story of Joseph and where it really starts getting good, him getting sold, and Potiphar and the whole situation. We're going to dig into all of that next time. We'll bring Sean back to join us for that, for part 2 of 31 through 40. And we'll see you next time on Anchor to Truth. God bless.
Thank you guys.
Ciao.
Hello.